Hello, welcome to IMO with me, Aaron Bastani. You can follow me on Twitter, @Aaron You can follow Novara Media on Twitter, @Novara Media. Thanks for watching. Britain is a post-industrial economy, with the vast majority of work and economic output being in the service sector. But what does that mean, and why did it happen? Why did one of the big manufacturing economies of the 20th century move to what we now call a post-industrial model? The answer to that means we have to go back to the early 1970s, when big powerful labour movements, not just in Western Europe but North America too, meant that as wages were rising, corporate profits were being squeezed. Now, if you were a capitalist, that was a significant problem, and they had to come up with a solution. They did, and it was twofold: the spatial fix and the technological fix. The first being about a certain kind of globalisation, and the second being about automation. So first, the technological fix. In response to the strength of organised labour, capital expelled it from the production process, replacing it with automation and fixed capital. But buying fixed capital, new machines and robots to do what workers used to do, is expensive. So there was another solution too. That was the spatial fix, sending production to other parts of the world where wages were lower. China, Central Europe and South Asia, for instance. As David Harvey so beautifully puts it, capitalism doesn't solve its problems, it merely relocates them. But workers today are still fighting for getting higher wages, and just as it was a problem for capitalism in 1970s Europe, the same is true in China and elsewhere in 2014. And this year, when the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai asked its members about their biggest challenges, 91% replied, rising costs. And that's unsurprising given China saw over 10% wage growth in 2013-2014. So it's workers' struggle which increased automation and kick-started a certain kind of globalisation after the mid-1970s. You could even say that workers' struggle is the reason behind some of the major innovations we've seen over the last 4 decades. The aftermath of that in the developed world is post-industrial economies. Economies built on service work, with the voter base of social democracy, social democratic parties, industrial labour movements massively reduced. Those industries like mining and public transport, which were hard to automate and couldn't be relocated, were subject to sustained political attack. You only need to look at the miners in the 1980s and more recently attempts to automate the London Underground to understand that. And production relocating to places with lower wages, like China over the last several decades, also provided a solution to lowering pay in places like Britain too. And that's why we've seen stagnant wages both sides of the Atlantic for the working class over the last 30 years. Well, the question then is, how is that politically achievable? Well, the cheaper stuff now being made on the other side of the world also meant significantly lower inflation and increasingly cheap products for us to buy. Between the mid-1970s and the mid-2000s, pay for working people was flat. But that wasn't such a problem because consumer goods like phones and televisions were getting cheaper, just as borrowing money was becoming even easier. That meant that just as the economic base of capitalism changed, so too did the prevailing ideology which sought to legitimise it. Post-industrial economies were never inevitable. They were never a necessary historical event where one minute you're manufacturing cars and steel and the next you're giving massages and opening cereal cafes. What is clear is that China and other parts of the global south today are increasingly expensive for capital to make significant profits. And that's going to require, again, more automation and more relocation. Indonesia is touted as the next frontier here, but expect parts of Africa to heavily industrialise over the next few decades too. To conclude, I'm inclined to agree with Ashok Kumar when he said on Novara FM that there is no next China. And that's a major problem for capitalism, probably the biggest. So as workers' gains in places like China mean they're getting an ever larger share of the pie, how will capital solve the problem? And what would it mean, politically, for the whole world to become a post-industrial economy when we're producing more stuff than ever before? That's the basis of the secular crisis, something I'll be discussing on the next IMO. Comments below. Until then, bye.